All right, let's talk inquiry. Today, what I wanted to do is just give some quick thoughts about like the stuff that is already kind of on the top of my head, and then um, and then break us into some small discussion groups to bat around ideas and resources about what inquiry, why inquiry, um, and to really inquire about that, and a little bit of the how, and then for us to get back together and share all those ideas. Maybe before we start, let's all just take um, a moment to hold on a second. Give yourself a moment to just write down on a piece of paper as you are thinking about inquiry and how you use it with your students. How do we help our students ask better questions? And then when we have questions, how can we go a little bit, help them kind of go deeper with the questions that they have? And what are some ways we can be really intentional about that? So how do we ask better questions, and then how do we follow up on that? Just sort of, let's just see what's kind of on the top of your head. We're all going to take 1 minute and just kind of write down what is on the top of your mind. And then we will, I'll show you a couple of things, and then we'll go into some of our breakout rooms. Just make some bullet points or some sketch notes of whatever comes to mind. So also, as we're thinking about inquiry, this might be a good time to also write down whatever, excuse me, any questions that you have as you're thinking about inquiry, stuff that you would like to get more resources or thoughts on. What questions do you have about using inquiry in your teaching? All right, everybody. We have kind of bounced around with some of these ideas before, and the last time we talked about this, I showed a flow chart that I've made of sort of thinking about some inquiry strategies, and we got feedback from people on how to update that and improve it. So I want to show you what that is, and also show you one other thing that I had shared at that time. So I'm going to just do this quick share of stuff that's this kind of low-hanging inquiry fruit stuff that I think a lot of people are maybe already aware of, but if not, this might help. I'm going to do just a quick screen share, and then we'll go into some group meetings, small group meetings, and that's not what I wanted to share. We'll try that again. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to, there we are. So one thing was that I was, when we're asking questions and getting students to ask better questions, I find the who, what, where, when, how, why series really, really useful. We've talked about this before, I know. Each one of these really gets at different kinds of questions. If you're asking where, it makes you think geographically, where was this found? When you're thinking, what you're thinking, like, what is the function of this big brow ridge? So those different questions just get you thinking in different ways. And this is what I call a scaffold, and you give it to students, And you just sort of, what I find often is more useful than saying like, consider who, what, where, when, how, why, and they'll kind of go like, huh? Is I will say, let's play with when. So if you have today, like let's just pick one little piece of this and think when we're thinking, we can go for any question that comes to you, but let's really see what we can do with when questions and think about time and timing and timelines and those sort of things in your questions. So you can give them a little, instead of all the prompts, you give them one little prompt. Two other scaffolds that I find really useful. This one is the National Baccalaureate School Key Concepts series, and it is just an amazing bunch of questions that get kids to ask very, very interesting questions. This list of questions is pinned up on the wall of every IB classroom from kindergarten on up. And it gets people to ask really, really rich questions. The ones at the end, those last three, I think are really also important for being an intentional, thoughtful human being. What are different points of view on this? How do I know what I know? I mean, that reflection piece, like, what's the strength of the evidence for this? That's an incredibly powerful question. And the last one is, what is my responsibility to this? You ask that about any question, and interesting things may come up. The first form, function, causation, change, and connection are very similar to what we find with the next generation science standards cross-cutting concepts. So structure and function, that's form and function. The systems and systems thinking, that is connection, and the stability and change is change. So you see a lot of those kind of reflected in that. So those ones directly tie over, unlike the ones pattern and scale and proportion. Those aren't included in the IBS key concept ones. But similarly, those perspective, reflection, and responsibility ones are not part of NGSS. So they each have a little bit that the other one doesn't. I find these scaffolds really, really interesting, and something that I wrote down. I was wondering, like, could I come up with, what I think would be kind of an ultimate digestible, memorable, sticky list of prompts that, how might we scavenge from all these to kind of get that best, or maybe just one of these is that list. The other thing I just wanted to share with you folks is that I rewrote that flow chart that I had made before. Excuse me. This is what you do once you get a question. So there's not really kind of rich kind of drawing out about how to make observations or ask questions yet. But we have these three categories of questions: the let's see questions that you treat by directly observing something; the could it be questions, in which you're going to use inference to get some predictions and then test those; and the last one, the let it be questions. These are the ones where you can neither use inference nor direct observation. And in this case, you're just outside of the realm of science, and there are still many other ways that we can approach those questions through. So I've kind of restructured this, given it a little bit more parallel structure. So the ultimate acts that you do at the end are on the far right-hand side, and the actions next to those. Any question, a place where there's a decision that you have to make, that's what you're seeing in the diamonds there. So this is a new version of that flow chart, and if you're just new to this, it might be a lot to absorb, but I know that there's a number of folks who are with us um, who have seen this material before. So just wanted to show you this slightly restructured, and hope that that was useful. Um, so, oh, by the way, while we were doing those previous announcements, I was able to get in there. I think I fixed all the 404 errors. So, bam, just like that. Thank you for letting us know. Before we go into, maybe let's take just a little bit of time before we drop into some small group meetings. Let's just sort of see questions, ideas, thoughts that people would be particularly interested in exploring or discussing in those small groups. And then maybe what we could do is we'll let people choose which ones they want to go into. And so I'm going to let participants choose rooms, and let me, so raise your paw if you have an idea for an inquiry discussion room topic that would be a lot of fun. Kate, what are you thinking?
It might be a discussion room, or it might just be a thought to put out there. But you prefaced all of this with how do we ask better questions, and I'm intrigued with what is a better question? Like, what is a good question when we use these words? I think we have assumptions around that. I'd be curious about how people approach that.
Excellent. Let's, Eleni, tell me your thought.
Yeah, hi. I am curious about how I, as a teacher or facilitator, can model questions. So instead of always asking other people to ask questions, how do I facilitate in such a way that I'm modeling? Yeah, Ivea put it in the chat. It's perfect. How can I model questions as a facilitator and questions as a form of inquiry? And
Awesome.
joy.
Excellent. Are there any other suggestions for that we might have as a breakout room? I'm going to put my idea in there as what is kind of a good list of curiosity prompts. And we've got 3 little categories. I'm going to create 3 breakout rooms. And I'm going to rename the first one. What is a better question? I'm going to rename the second one modeling. And I am, oops, that one didn't take. And I was just getting so proud of myself for being so Zoom fluent. Modeling. And the third one, curiosity prompts. I'm going to open all rooms, and I am going to let you pick which room you want to bounce over to. We'll just spend a little bit of time there. So let's just hear from some of those rooms. It's totally okay if you left your initial topic. But what were some nuggets and gems? You don't have to, also don't feel pressure that you need to do a word for word accounting of everything that was said there. But what really sticks out to you? What are you going to be carrying forward with you in your little wad of curious electric meat? that is going to be sort of stimulating new thoughts. So what were your highlights? We'll just bounce around to the different groups. Lindy, could I put you on the spot for kind of a report out from our crew?
Yeah, sure. So we were focused, we were supposed to be focused on how, like, what kinds of prompts or scaffolds we could use to get students to ask questions or engage in inquiry in general. And I think we began by thinking about like what kinds of prompts Jack was showing originally, and then really started thinking about like beyond just questioning direct phenomena or directly observed phenomena, how do we get students engaged in questioning each other, in questioning evidence, in questioning how different evidence is created or maintained or presented. And so we came up with a few questions. I think that Jack got this one from Visible Learning. What do you see that makes you say that? How could we investigate that? And what is the quality of this evidence? And so kind of like starting to move towards more complex epistemological considerations. And we simplified that potentially to just, you know, how do we know? How could we know? And how do they know? And then also towards the end, we're kind of talking about, yeah, like, yay, epistemologies. And also at the end, we were kind of talking about like, how are we thinking about teaching students that, you know, certain people have a dog in the fight and that information can be biased depending on who is saying that they know it and their positionality. So I think, you know, these were just kind of considerations that we were throwing around. And as far as scaffolding that for students, you know, I talked a little bit about, you know, just having students collaborating with one another and engaging in questioning tactics with one another, because I think that's a really good way for them to start to complicate their own questioning methods, especially when they're questioning with, you know, practicing that with people their own age. And I also think that, you know, giving them occasional questions that don't have answers and helping them kind of navigate those bigger questions that, you know, might have a lot of evidence on either side, or there might be evidence that can speak to either side depending on how you reason with it, but allowing them to kind of grapple with those questions as well.
Wow. Lindsay, something that I really love that you kind of brought into the discussion and that our group kind of came into was this whole idea of what happens when you play with questions where there is not a clear answer. And that kids often sometimes at the end of doing an investigation, you want to know the right thing. And you just came off several months of doing this project with students where where at the end of the day, it's complex and it's gray and there isn't an answer. And that is so real life. I really love that. And thank you for that summary. So let's, is there somebody else who can report out on something that was happening in one of the other discussions? It was so much fun to be in a little group like that. Wasn't that good? You guys think we should do more of that? I know it's kind of leading the witness, but yeah, that was cool. I'm going to add Eleni into the spotlight here. So tell me, what was really resonating for you in the discussions that you were having?
Yeah. So hi everybody. I was in the group that talked about how teachers can model, and one of my group members, Marsha Lynn, is here, but she's in a classroom, so she has to be off camera. So, and the others have left. So I volunteered to not necessarily summarize, but to say what stood out for me. And I think what was so helpful for me was making this distinction between the kind of questions some of us asked when we were like in school, you know, questions that show how clever we are and how much I know, and, you know, I have like a really good question, versus like really genuine questions. How do I model the joy of like just really wanting to know something? You know, like I use this example of lichen. It's a question I really have now. It's like, why is there different colors of lichen? I don't even know if I'm pronouncing the word correctly. And so I want to find that out. So it's and I think that when you model, and it came out in our discussion that when if you can't fake joy, you know? So if you're really curious about something and excited to learn about it, I think that's contagious. So I find that, and are discussed in the breakout room, it seemed to resonate with others that modeling one's own joy and curiosity, genuine questions, not the question that's so convoluted and worded to show off how much you know, and you sort of eked out a question at the end of it. Then the second part that we also talked about was, okay, now you've got a question, and we're in this universe of Google everything and get an answer. How do you determine, how do you evaluate the resources for the answers that you're getting? And I work mostly with adults, but it's interesting, if once they get in touch with their inner child, then they're young at heart. So evaluating what you find is really important, and that's something else that came up. And then last but not least, it was sort of a not tangential, but it sort of came up as we were talking, and we were all women. We happened to be all women in the group. That many of us want to model not knowing, but sometimes, and this is not a blanket statement, it's just a sort of trying to formulate the statement as I'm speaking to you, but some women tend to be more self-deprecating than men. That's not true across the board, obviously, but that tendency to, oh, I don't really know, let's find out together. But I think there's a way of modeling not knowing as an amazing foundation of science, that like not knowing stuff is great because it means you're on the edge of human knowledge. So I'll stop there. Those are some of the things that we talked about. And I know Marcia's in her room, but if I've missed anything, Marcia, then I hope you chime in. And Ivea was there for a bit too. So, if there's other things I left out, please just chime in.
Yeah, I mean, what a great thought of that. As we're modeling things, we are you're modeling just these sort of fundamental life skills of being curious and throwing yourself before the wonder of the world. And as you're doing that, are we showing kind of our openness, our vulnerability, our epistemological humility, and at other times we are and sort of raising that sort of as a gender thing also. Males are much more likely to come forward with a strong opinion. Let me come forward with a strong opinion on this, because that we know, because that's been our training. We've been, from a very early age, we've been trained to be strong, be forceful, be assertive, and like, I have no clue, but I'm going to be strong, forceful, and assertive. Here it comes. And that then gets interpreted as knowing, not knowing, and all these sorts of things. As gets confused with assertiveness, gets confused with knowledge or understanding. This is, you guys had a fun discussion. Is there anybody else who was in that room who wants to add to what Lainey was saying? Marley is bringing up some of the language of uncertainty and the usefulness of that, and how we can model that.
One
Yes.
final thought on it is that it's because what you said, Jack, really reminded me that we made a distinction also in our discussion that there are spaces, different spaces do have different functions. So, you know, there I am teaching continuing education in an art center, and, you know, you come as you are. And it's very different than if you are in a classroom and if you are working in a school. And, you know, it's not always the right setting to you know, oh, we don't know. I mean, you know, it's the presentation, one needs to discern like where you are, like what space you're in, and how, which is the where do you want to just enlarge that space a little bit, because if you go too far, if I go too far, for example, then it's like, oh, this is ridiculous, this happy, joyous person, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. What, you know, it gets weird. You know what I mean? So it's sort of in this space with you, I can share that curiosity and joy. In a different space, I have to sort of sneak the joy in, and before they know it, they're having a great time, something like that.
And isn't it interesting that joy um, and epistemological honesty can be interpreted as weakness, as softness, as being not up to the task. Um,
Yep, it's crazy, isn't it?
yeah, that's
It's mind-blowing.
yeah, Lindy's saying this is especially true in science. Um, the I'm going to, before we bounce to the next group, I'm going to bounce over to gallery view. I'm going to look around for hands if there's anybody who wants to piggyback on any of the ideas that have just been expressed. And let's bounce over to Avea.
I just want to say, considering the huge amount of things that people just said in the chat, it seems like we're going to have another discussion about this at some point. We've got a lot of things in the chat about confidence, and modeling of not knowing is very related to positionality and context of the community, as Kate Rudder is saying here. Rebecca is saying that women are more, it's more common for us to qualify our statements using the word just, as in like to sort of take away a bit of the impact of our statements. Lindy saying that that we think that there might be coming from a history of being told that we don't know what we're talking about as women, and like there's a lot more here in the chat, and so I'm thinking that we're going to need to talk about this more.
Let's do that and have it soon. Actually, I've been kind of keeping this whole conversation has kind of erupted into things which we need to unpack more. Right now, I have a Nature Journal Educator forum on evaluating the quality of resources. One on powerful rhetorical techniques that kind of can overshadow reason. More on logical fallacies, on confidence and knowing, and gender, and you know, there's whew, this we've got some good stuff that we can play with. So I'm now going to jump over for anybody from the third group, third breakout room, gallery. Is there anybody who would like to take point on, again, you don't have to be kind of a court reporter, but what were your take homes? What really stood out for you? Anything that you wanted to share about ideas that happened in that space?
Well, at least cue it up. There were three of us. It was Joelle and Rosa, and then we were joined by Marley later on. And I would like to, maybe I'll mention a couple things and then pass it off. Joelle, would you mind speaking up as well? Okay, I'll pass it off to you, and then maybe you can have Rosa bring it home, and Marley, you can jump in at the end if you like. But there were two things that we started out with. The first was an observation that complex questions can be really meaty and chewier, as Rosa said, which was beautiful, and that they offered an invitation to unpack those. The next observation was our topic was better questions, right? And questioning better and what that might mean. The next really meaningful and intriguing thing was that Joelle's observation that a good question has a relationship with the asker. And that really opened up a different way of bringing, the whole person into that question, instead of just having questions have this abstract quality in the room or in the conversation. There was a good amount of conversation around what worrying about asking dumb questions felt like, especially for adults. I think we've touched on that in the chat, and is a deeper conversation. And that, why the kind of breaking through an expectation of why questions that have already been answered are meaningful to ask. And then I'm going to pass it off. Joelle, what are some of the thoughts and experiences you had?
Perhaps with the point of the right question is the question who is near from the person who has the question, and the nature journal could be a good tool to be really with my question. So if having a link between what I'm drawing, what I'm writing, what I'm observing, to ask a question. It is my question, and I can formulate the question nearer from me because I'm using the nature journal. I think this is a bit interesting. And
Excellent.
Rosa, you want to bring it home just with maybe a couple other thoughts?
I don't know. Oh, Rosa, perhaps help.
Yeah, I was trying to get unmuted. After 3 years, still struggle. One of the things that I brought up, and I would love for us to talk about more, is, and this is coming up with the other two groups as well, the sort of vulnerability of asking questions and not knowing. And I think that particularly in an adult informal setting like the ones that I've started to get involved in, I'm coming to realize that that's a big ask. That saying, just pretend you don't know anything and ask a bunch of questions. What we were just saying about joy and confidence, and joy and epistemological honesty being seen as a lack of confidence and a lack of understanding, as opposed to a positive way to interact with the world. That, wow, we could talk for an hour on that. Jack, I brought up your asking us the unanswerable question, what am I wrong about right now? And that led Marley to tell us there's a apparently great book on being wrong that I look forward to seeing some about.
Yeah, it's such a what a rich space this is. And notice how, just sort of thinking as an educator, asking questions about how to get my students to ask questions is now making me think much more introspectively about my own processes and asking questions. This idea of the question and its relationship to the asker is such a rich zone. There was in the early days of the Park Service, there was an interpreter named Tilden who came up with Tilden's principles, and lots of subsequent park education was derivative of that framework that Tilden presented. And in those early days, one of the things that Tilden suggested is that anything that you're teaching that doesn't really relate to the person who you're interacting with, the visitor, if they can't kind of see their connection to that, that's going to just sort of skip off their head like a stone, and that's not going to be absorbed. And here, the thinking about how much does a question kind of go out and get those things that that learner wants and brings it in. When they're asking questions from that place, they're saying, like, look, Tilden's principle on that, this would be specifically how to connect with me, and that kind of an invitation. Let's bring in Rebecca on this. Thoughts, comments, and ideas.
Hi. I was not in this group because I came in late, but I just really liked what Kate Rudder was saying about that questions that have already been answered are still meaningful to ask, because that's something I've actually thought a lot about over the past couple of years, because when I first started teaching nature journaling, I was kind of teaching the idea that you say, Jack, that's like, or I don't know who says this, maybe you say it, but that well, you know, you're the world expert on your own backyard. Nobody else you know, has that information that you do. Scientists can't be everywhere. So, you know, when we're paying attention, we're helping to learn new things. We can contribute to citizen science, all that kind of stuff. Where I think, Jack, I think you're the one who said, like, you're the world expert on this specific leaf. Nobody else has paid attention to this leaf as much as you do. So, like, you're literally learning things and observing things that nobody else in the whole world knows about. But then at the Nature Journal Teachers Workshop with Ann Stevens, she was talking about her research on how students learn how to think through the process of nature journaling over a number of years. And she was talking about, how does she say it? Like the process of meaning making and of creating meaning, creating knowledge. But it wasn't in that context, in the terms of something that nobody has ever learned before. It's just, how do you create knowledge for yourself? And it doesn't matter. It's even if somebody else knows it, even if you could look it up on Google, the process of creating that knowledge from scratch, from your own observation, is still really valuable. So now I think of it in terms of both ways of meaning making. Is one, it can be something that you're contributing to the wider body of knowledge of humanity that you learned in your own backyard. That's something unique, but it's also still really valuable just for yourself.
Yeah. That the and being self-aware of your own epistemology. How are you taking in information? I think makes that even more useful. Sort of a self-awareness of that I'm learning, and I'm learning from my own direct observations, and here's the evidence for that, because I saw this thing happen, and then I saw this thing happen. Even if you don't do like the third step in Mary Oliver's instructions for living a life, which is tell about it, right? Even if you don't go ahead and tell about it, and it goes no further than your journal, and you don't share those journals, that is a moment that you have opened yourself up to, dived into, and reveled in a way that you otherwise would not have been able to do. Yeah. Does anybody have any thoughts, comments, or ideas that can that tie into this thread? Let's bring in Mr. Marley. Marley, where do we find you on the planet right now?
Uh, I'm still in my mom's shed in San Diego.
Okay.
But couple things on answering I love the way that Rebecca brought that up, because that's something I wasn't even thinking about. But also asking the questions that have already been answered, or like the obvious questions, is super important. If you're leading, like, I'll try to keep it like a real situation. If you're with a group of kids and you're nature journaling some plants in a succulent garden, and there's some aloe vera or something, and everybody starts asking, or maybe even the facilitator, the teacher asks, okay, what do you notice about that flower? So that's great, but that question already has assumptions built into it. And if everybody else just sort of keeps going with that question, I noticed that the flower is orange, I noticed this. But if you have one kid who says, what is a flower, or is that a flower, or is that an animal, or some of these kind of questions, it's like that might be important because maybe it's an inflorescence and not actually a flower. Or maybe like someone says petal, what color are the petals, but they're not actually petals. So that kind of thing is important. And then the other story that I like to tell for obvious or dumb questions is, there was this little girl who, it was like in the 70s. She went on a trip with her grandpa, and he took a photo of them at the Grand Canyon, and then they're walking away. This was back when they're old film cameras. And she asked, why can't I see the picture right now? And so that's kind of like asking a question that's already been answered. Well, the adult could say, well, because it has to go into this chemical bath, and then it comes out of the chemical bath, and then it has to get processed, blah, blah, blah. But instead, that guy actually listened to her question, which was asking something that had already been answered. He spent several years on it and developed a Polaroid camera. So it's like, that shows that asking an obvious question, or a question that has already been answered, has value. That's all I wanted to chime in there.
Thank you for that. That's a really interesting story. And also just about those questions that haven't been answered. When we get those, I wonder if there's a way that we can be intentional about looking at those questions with new eyes. Maybe that question being re-asked is an invitation for us to look at it in a different way. You could say, that's a sequoia cone. You could also, I mean, is there a different way to answer that question in a way that you have never answered it before, that will make you, the educator, think about that object in a way that you haven't before? I don't know. Let's bring on Avea Moore. Hey there.
Hey there. So building on that, and I apologize if I'm repeating things that have already been said, I hope I'm not, is that when you have, when you ask those obvious questions, then, as Marley was saying about assumptions built into them, also the evidence, or the strength of the evidence for those so-called obvious questions, might have changed, or the answer might have, even on things that we think. And that could be anything from our understanding of it's changed. It could be that the thing itself has changed. I mean, life evolves, life changes. So we don't exactly know that the answer is going to remain the same forever. And I'm not sure exactly what things people find are very solid in the world, because we're always looking and having to evaluate the strength of the evidence. So when a student asks a question that might seem obvious, it's also an invitation to look if that evidence is still strong in a way, and to teach other students how to look at that as well. So I wanted to bring that up. And then also to kind of build in to what Rebecca was saying about meaning making and creating our knowledge in the world. I think that that's another reason why it's important to be aware of our biases, is because one of the three legs of what we do is, I wonder, it reminds me of 4 if you also include action, because I like Aisha's prompt. But it reminds me of, as we talk about with psychology of intelligence analysis, our memories are tricky things. And so we're creating meaning, but we're also creating meaning with a memory that may not always be perfect. And it doesn't need to be, because imperfection and bias are part of the human experience. But it's important to be aware of that and how that affects our meaning making in the world as well. But what I'd want to know about as well, to follow up on this, is how we can, building on Eleni's breakout room topic about how we model questions, how do we model searching for biases in a way that students can grasp? And how do we model being aware of biases in a way that's not like making people feel badly about it, but instead just like genuinely questioning through how things go, and in a way that's productive and constructive.
And if I can just tag onto that, so when spotting these biases, this is kind of like the what am I currently wrong about one, but how can I spot not just other people's biases, but my biases? And I think that that's brutal.
That's what I mean most is
Yeah.
teaching, is modeling the process, not of searching for everybody else's biases, but looking at our own biases.
Oh. Mm, mm, mm. This this is so rich, this area. What I'd like to do is just to give people a little bit more time here to give any other thoughts that are kind of hanging on the peripheries of your attention that you wanted to share with us. Perhaps, find some little thread, kind of tease that out, show us a little bit more about what potential is in there. And then we're going to kind of close for today, because I know that a lot of people here have other things that they get to do. And if these go on too long, people are going to stop coming. And we need you all educators out there educating, but we also really value you being here. So we're going to be closing this meeting fairly soon. Before we do, just wanted to see if there's anyone else that let's join Rosa. And hi.
Hi there. So one thing that I brought up in our group and that I want to talk about an extra time is shifting our feelings about being wrong, or being seen to be wrong. So I have a friend who went through Toastmasters training, and they said the single most important thing they got out of it was reframing that physical feeling that they had associated with anxiety and stage fright, and reframing that as excitement and anticipation. And so it's the same feeling, the physiological, like my pulse is a little fast or my hands are a little clammy. And apparently they did some work around like, wow, that means I'm geared up. It's the moment we're going to do the thing. And bringing that to this question, how do we take being wrong, something that is often associated with, oh God, I'm stupid, I've embarrassed myself, or I'm just not on the same page as everybody else, and instead try to think of ways that's like, I don't know. There are so many things here I don't know. Or how exciting, I was wrong about something. What else am I wrong about? And having that being a place of generative excitement, as opposed to feelings that make us want to stop asking questions.
I think, Rosa, you've just hit a whole new topic for an entire educators forum there on being wrong. And that kind of ties into what somebody was saying earlier about sort of like so much of what we think we know today is going to be overturned tomorrow. How do we embrace that with humility and in a way that isn't just a postmodernist saying like, oh, we can't know anything, so it's all the same. Like, no, we actually can kind of get ourselves closer to being less wrong. Um, and um, and what does that look like, and how to model that? I think that a session on being wrong would be an absolute delight. Thank you. So one other idea that sort of just kind of, or on the edges of it, I wanted just to throw out there also is just sort of the idea and the thought that kind of going back to, remember when Eleni was talking about joy and modeling the joy? I want to just go back and give that thought a big ol' hug and a kiss, because I think it's so, there's so much there with that. So we're not just modeling how to be scientists, we're modeling how to embrace the unknown. And so what we do with these questions is, I think the way we face it is sometimes more important than what we face, because they're watching how we behave in all of these situations. Something that I've got this book on my shelf about coyote mentoring. It's this way of kind of being a naturalist guide. And the big thing that is kind of one of my big beefs with the book is that it sort of seems to be suggesting like I know that this is a coyote scat that's lying in the ground in front of me, and I'm going to lead the kids by the nose through a series of questions to figure out that it's a coyote scat. There's no authentic question there for the teacher. And I think that the more that they can see us, like, it's one thing to say, like, I'm going to now use the Socratic method to kind of get you to, in about 15 minutes go like, it's a coyote scat. And then I can go, yes, it's a coyote scat. And then it's still this, like, from my mind to yours, when teachers are playing the, like, guess what's in my brain game, it really bugs me. And that's really different than me saying, this is a coyote scat, or at least I think it is, and here's the evidence why I think that. And then finding the more interesting question that's beyond that. And so that you actually are engaged at the edge of that mystery with the students, and then you're not pretending to be excited about, like, oh, I wonder what this could be, right? You're authentically investigating some phenomenon with them on real terms. And I think that the more that we let the students see that even for us, mysteries are everywhere, and then to engage with those mysteries with them, I think allows us to model what Eleni was talking about in an authentic way. Because the students they're good at figuring out when we're full of it, right? And just wanted to throw that that little idea into the mix as well, and also see, Eleni, your thoughts about that as connecting with what you were saying about modeling.
Yeah, I loved what you said, Jack, and it reminds me and it does mirror back the vibe of this conversation. It reminds me of something I learned from a wonderful teacher, a person 30 years younger than myself, a fabulous teacher for me, and that is to own loving what you love. Okay, bring back the like and just using that as I love that I notice these different colors. Now, what happens is sometimes students, they get confused. They see that you love what you love. They want to love it too. And then they start liking as well. But then the challenge as a teacher is to have them love what they love. So my joy about my curiosity about something generates something very positive, and then we need to help the student realize or find that we're going to support them loving what they love. It doesn't have to be the same as us, and that I think is the next level of thinking about this question in my mind. Because we're not in graduate school where, I love X and now all my students are going to like do research for me doing X. No, I want them to find out that they love Y, Z, A, and how can I support their pursuit of the questions that raise their energy. So when I talk about joy, I also talk about what someone else said earlier about emotions, that anxiety and excitement share some physiological cues. So I often say to my students, notice where your energy rises. Notice where you get like a little happy. Ooh, I like that color. Ooh, like when you have those ooh, those funny moments of ooh, and your ooh and my ooh are, yeah, where's the juice? Vey is writing in the chat. Yeah. And not only it doesn't need to be the same as mine, I hope it's different than mine, because that will expand my world. So yeah, I just love this conversation. Thanks, Jack, for expanding it even further.
Oh, well, that took it to a whole new level. Vea, you were tagging into that.
First of all, I want to say before I forget that I think it'd be a lot of fun someday if Marley and Rebecca would want to lead a workshop together. Marley about the things that he teaches about bread and butter, juice, and growth mindset, which we haven't come up with a clever name for that involves food, and Rebecca about strength-based growth. And so I'd love it if if the two of you would be interested in leading a workshop together sometime, because I think that could be really fun. And I get that from the notice where your energy rises, because it reminds me of Marley's talk about juice. The second thing is that what you said about loving what your students love and becoming interested in their topics. There's a particular philosopher friend of mine, I mean, that's not really narrowing it down, I've got a lot of them, but one who says this particular quote that I want to read out loud. This particular friend of mine says, "For every topic that exists in the world, there is more to learn about it, and it's more interesting than you think it is." That would be Susan Beckhart. So I wanted to say that because I like that it seems to go in the same spirit of what you're saying about loving what your students love. Think about their topics as that even if you dismissed their topics before, it's more interesting than you think it is. And so lean a little bit deeper into what your students love. I wanted to mention that.
Oh, I love this. I love this love on the love. And just to tag into the whole love theme here. Shortly after I started college, somebody told me that your mission in each class you take is to find out why the professor who teaches it is so passionate about that topic, that they love it enough that they've devoted so much of their time and energy to that. So go to enough office hours, ask enough questions, and until you can figure that out about each one of them. And so I tried to, and with many you could, with some you actually couldn't. You're like, why are you here? I'm so sorry. You need some coffee. I thought that's something like that, or maybe a snack. But if you can figure out like why they love it, then that's also, teaching that helps you learn how to love it. And so if we can show that love to our students, we're teaching them how to love and give them permission to love whatever it is that they love. Love that thought. Maybe we need a whole educator forum on loving love. I'll write that down. Okay, love. We'll see where we go.
Before we conclude for today, there's a question in the chat that came up, and that's that on the topic of the teachers conference coming up, is there need for any teachers? I know that Rebecca and possibly some other folks might have had topics they might have been interested in, and we weren't sure who to ask.
Let's see. I would send. I think that we've got a lot of it wrapped up, but it is not airtight. We would love, so maybe send those to me, and I can forward it to whoever. Actually, if you want to be safer about that, forward it to me and Roseanne, and we'll see what we can do there. Folks, it's been wonderful to spend some time with all of you. Marley, thank you for dropping in. Glad you could be with us. Everybody who's here. I'm going to jump over to my gallery view just to take a look at you beautiful people before you all wink out. Hey there. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your wisdom and knowledge and for participating in this. Also, thank you so much for folks who suggested that we have more, that we take advantage of that sort of small conversation. I think we saw that was really effective today. And then the result of those small conversations just spilled over into this big group meeting. Thank you all for being here. Let's keep pushing the envelope of understanding this and of sharing it. We're figuring out the best practices in this, and it's a total work in progress. But with this collective wisdom, I think we're getting there so much faster. I'm so grateful to all of you. Thank you, Avea, for helping manage and mentor and monitor this group as well, and for everybody for your contributions and ideas. Be well, my friends, and I will see you soon.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.